Going into my freshman year of college, my parents and I were very paranoid. We didn't know if I'd be able to handle this new environment with new experiences that was so far away from home. The only difference of my experiences from other students was that I have Asperger's syndrome, which is part of the autism spectrum. I worried about being taken seriously by my peers and if I was going to be able to balance social life with school and with everything else. And if I didn't ever felt like I wasn't going to, I would get overwhelmed and start crying in my dorm. I have adapted since then, and I'm lucky because not all people with autism are as mild as I am, and they have much harder experiences. A unique difficulty faced is gender, as women have their own issues. Women with autism have their own issues that they struggle with. I want to talk about these issues and these experiences, particularly in post-secondary education. I also want to inform my viewers on what colleges do for these people and what they could possibly do in the future. I will be using multiple terms such as autism, Asperger's, ASB, etc. Oh, and ASD as well, autism spectrum disorder, but they are not the same thing, although they are similar. First, I want to talk about history. Before the 1970s, most people with disabilities were denied education as schools wouldn't or couldn't provide the needs to make life easier for them. This changed after the Civil Rights Movement with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which made accommodations a free right for all students based on their individual needs. But sometimes those individual needs are based on the needs of one group while excluding the other. It is a fact that more men are diagnosed with autism than women, but as psychologists Sullivan and Thorius point out, that does not necessarily mean that less exist. Women show autism differently than men do, both biologically and socially. In an experiment done by PLOS1, both men and women with autism were given a mental rotation test, but they used different sections of their brain to solve it, although they had equal proficiency in it. Sociologically, women are brought up differently and express themselves differently than men with autism do. As Dr. Davidson and Tamas point out, the rules that women are supposed to go by are intense, but at the same time subtle. And if you don't follow them to a T, you're criticized by those around you for it. But there's still no logic in it, and for people that logic is what they cling to, this means that the rules of gender can be confusing and frustrating. This difference in these two main factors in what makes women portray autism differently than how men do has led to misunderstanding in psychology and even misdiagnosis, which is why I think feminism matters so much to neurodiversity in the case of intersectionality and acceptance within society. Now that I have mentioned all of this, I would like to get into the college factors of this. Even those that are, like me, mild or high functioning, as some people say, even those people have issues in a college environment beyond the academic factors of it. A study of mostly female Asperger's students with Asperger's found that the high functioning group had a higher GPA, but were more depressed, more hostile, more angry This only goes to show that strictly academic-based accommodations do not solve all the problems, such as social ones. And speaking of social problems, microaggressions. Neurotypical students can bring microaggressions into the mix using their privilege and lack of knowledge that the two groups have about each other as a way of undermining them. As Dr. Carolyn Pepper of UMKC Counseling Services says, I think those in a position of privilege need to do a better job of recognizing their privilege and becoming more educated about marginalized groups. UMKC Disabilities and the counseling services do what they can for their students in a variety of ways. There is parking accommodations, testing accommodations, dietary ones, and in the counseling services, things such as psychological assessment. Carolyn Pepper believes that these offices do the best they can despite the fact that they are both underfunded and understaffed. With my experiences of it, I think that it's okay, but I believe that it could be improved. Like, I have issues with planning my separate accommodation space on my own for a test a week in advance. Sometimes I don't know a week in advance if I'm going to need that separate space. Sometimes I struggle with talking to strangers from the disabilities office, and sometimes I struggle with bus routes because I'm not used to this area. As for what other students think, I will go to a study done by Dr. Jennifer Serrett, who found of a group of college students with autism who 53% of whom were female. Of the whole group, 31% that they were said that they were unhappy with the college environment and how accommodations had tried to provide to them. They said they were unhappy with the accommodations they were provided. So how do we fix this? There were a few popular ideas that I found within my research that I would like to discuss. The first is a support group of sorts that would have structured activities and would be based around individual interests and would only be limited to students with autism. This has worked in the past, but my arguments with it relate to what somebody in Dr. Jennifer Serrett described it as, saying that there's a possibility that if not handled correctly, this could lead to this feeling of awkward friend assignment for those that struggle to talk to strangers in the first place. The second idea was a mediator, who would be a professional or a student who would advocate to teachers and other professionals for the student with ASD. My problem with this is that I don't believe that it should be a third-party job to try and reach out and empathize with students who have autism. My favorite idea that I found was called universal design learning, which the expert on the subject, Rebecca Corey, defines as a form of teaching that incorporates accommodations into everyday habits by training professors and teachers to multiple styles and preferences. I love this idea because not only does it normalize accommodations within the setting of other neurotypical students, but it bridges the gap for women with autism who may not know their status due to misdiagnosis. It helps them academically while they are still trying to solve their identity. In addition to these accommodations that I have mentioned, there are ways that students and teachers can help as well. For teachers, it is important to acknowledge the multiple facets of a student with autism's identity. It is not just a person with autism, it is a person with autism who may have who is Asian, or is gay, or is trans, or all of the above. These multiple factors of what makes a person who they are definitely play a role in a person's experience with autism, and when accommodating to that person, this should be taken into account. As Dr. Edlin Pena says, minority groups such as people with disabilities are not homogenous, and to not acknowledge the multiple identities would be to dishonor lived experiences, limit understanding, and perpetuate stereotypes. When the world is moving towards a more intersectional society, it's important that colleges follow. The students can empathize in addition to what is said about the teachers. What in Dr. Jennifer Serrett's study, much more than any kind of accommodations or academic needs, what most people wanted was to be accepted by their neurotypical peers. They wanted to not be seen as odd if they needed to stim, such as rocking back and forth. This can be accomplished by having less separation and more normalization of ASD in a college environment. And that can be achieved through any of the past academic measures mentioned beforehand, such as a group or a person that speaks on your behalf. And this has been shown this could possibly help everyone involved. A Canadian study in 2013 found that college students were more likely to volunteer to help someone with autism if they had had past exposure. If a neurotypical person can better understand someone with autism, they are more likely to help them in any situation. And both parties benefit from this. The person with autism gains a better educational understanding, and the person who's neurotypical gains a better understanding of the people around them, including those with disabilities. I cannot speak for everybody that has autism. I have mild Asperger's syndrome. I am high functioning. I have it easy, so to speak. But what I can do is share the obstacles that others face. Other women, really. The women with autism are not just misunderstood by society, they're misunderstood by psychology. And so naturally, a college environment is hard. It's a struggle that is unique to their own situation. There are multiple ways to help this, though, such as empathy increase and UDL, Universal Design Learning, or even like a social outlet of any kind. And even though Universal Design Learning may be my favorite, any of these could make a difference, even to somebody as mild as myself. Thank you.